So this is what we had talked about yesterday, that succession is this gradual, predictable set of changes, either when a biological community crops up for the first time or when it regrows after it's been wrecked somehow. Wrecked. Utterly wrecked. And we said that primary succession was where this community is starting from scratch. There's never been a biological community. There is no soil. That's really an important distinction. And the first things that show up are lichen. So this is where we left our heroes. When we say that primary succession is slow, building an inch of topsoil can take a couple thousand years. It's that slow. We can speed it up dramatically by composting, but building soil is slow. And as long as there's no soil, there are no minerals for plants to grow, and they're the bottom trophic level in an entire ecosystem. So this takes quite a while. What's a whole lot faster is secondary succession. So secondary succession is where we had a biological community, it got wrecked, it was disturbed. We talk about disturbance. So whatever that disturbance was, the biological community will rebound after the disturbance. It'll come back, it'll regrow. If it's possible, it'll regrow all the pieces. Sometimes there are some serious changes after a disturbance. And we talked about the sort of metaphor for life. You know, something happens that shakes up your life, something disturbs your life, and eventually life goes back to normal. There's an adjustment period, and eventually it starts to slowly get back to normal. It may not be exactly the same normal. It may be a new normal. But you get back to something that looks like normal. Forest fires are a disturbance. Cutting down 94% of the trees in an area is a disturbance. When did that happen around here?
1943.
No. When? 1800s. Actually, 1790s. Between 1790 and 1803, Ohio lost 96% of its trees. We girdled them, we cut it all down, we fought the forest. We fought the forest and we won. European settlers came to what was essentially a managed old-growth forest system and pretty much turned it into fields. Remember we talked about the effect that had on deer? Yeah. So those old farm fields are really an ongoing disturbance. Really? Really?
Correct.
A vacant lot in a city. It's been paved over. A city lot in East Liverpool, Cleveland, Columbus, Youngstown, Akron. And I'm using Ohio cities because we're thinking in terms of what the biological community was prior to the disturbance. Because we have to know what it looked like prior to the disturbance before we can know what it's going to go back to. All of these are examples of biological communities that have been disturbed. Every single one of them. You guys made a guess. Is this the next slide? Did I skip a slide? Okay. Then I need to reorder them because I don't think this is the right order conceptually. Okay. So we said that primary succession is incredibly slow, like on the order of thousands of years. Aaliyah, stop. Thank you. This is a whole lot faster. This is a whole lot faster. And yesterday, I think I had you guys write down a guess about how long you thought it would take for a biological community to restore itself after a big disturbance. It depends on which biological community. Those that have higher levels of species richness and species diversity tend to have this process go a little bit faster. A good mixed mesophytic hardwood forest like we have here, this very, very special biological community from which you hail, the mixed mesophytic forest of the eastern U.S., takes about 100 years. You chop down the entire forest, make it into farm fields, make it into houses, make it into communities, then walk away, and in about 100 years, nature will reclaim it. Now, if there are structures under that, you're still going to see those structures. You know, and we said a lot of you have hiked through Beaver Creek and found old foundations, old locks and dams. They're still there. There's still evidence of that human activity, of that disturbance, but there are trees growing out of them. All the wood's gone. It's just down to piles of stone. So around here, it's about 100 years. In a rainforest near the equator with super crazy high levels of species richness and species diversity, it might be 20 years. On those Arctic tundras that we saw, where there are very low levels of species diversity and species richness, it might be a lot longer than this. So this 100 years is for us, for our biological community. Your mileage may vary based on the community that you're talking about. Now, what's the big difference between primary and secondary? And I think this should be the next slide. Correct? Is this the next one you have in order?
Yeah.
Okay. Secondary is happening where there has been a biological community that was disturbed. It could have been destroyed. It could have been completely paved over, city parking lots and streets. There's soil under there. How many of you have seen a plant growing up through asphalt? They're very powerful. Dandelions will crack cement. There's soil under there. They're not growing out of the cement. They're growing on soil. If there is no soil whatsoever, you're talking about a situation where it's primary succession. So a forest fire burns through a forest, kills a lot of trees, kills some animals, kills some shrubs and small plants. Primary or secondary? Secondary. There was a biological community there. That's the difference. This is much slower. Primary succession is 100 times slower than secondary. It's easier to rebuild something than it is to build it from scratch, having to put together all the materials. Imagine if you're going to build a house and you've got all your tools and you've got a lot of lumber. It's a big job, but it's doable. What if you have to start from no lumber and no tools? It takes a lot longer, and that's essentially what secondary or primary succession is. Pioneers! So pioneer species in both primary and secondary succession are the first things that show up, the first species that show up. And typically they are small, they are fast growing, and they are fast reproducing. Now, in a primary succession, because there's no soil, you don't get dandelions. What you tend to get instead is lichen, because they're building that soil from the ground up. In secondary succession, you already know what these are. They're the things that show up growing on pavement, that grow through cracks in the sidewalk, that would start the process of reclaiming a city if we let them. Once we stop disturbing it, once we sort of let go of the reins and let it take itself back, they're the first things that would show up. This is what existed here prior to European settlement. So then we come along and we basically cut it all down. We grow crops. We destroy the biological community, and we have farm fields. So this is the disturbance point. That point when we go from the intact biological community to the farm field to the different biological community. I mean, don't get me wrong, a yard or a farm field or a meadow is a biological community. It's not the one that existed there before. Who here has seen an overgrown farm field? Okay. I could assign homework. You could go out and walk them. So we go from the farm field that's a really controlled environment, I'm going to have to shrink this, to what I'll call, overgrown field. We could call it succession stage 1. instead of all those crops and instead of just grasses, what we start to see suddenly are, if we just abandoned it, we start to see crabgrass and plantain and dandelions. After a couple years, we might get goldenrod. We might get ironweed and Joe Pye, all these sort of open space flowers. But there aren't any trees yet. So this is still herbaceous plants. Herbaceous means they don't have wood on them. They're not like trees or bushes. They're soft. You can bend them. You can break them. Actually, everybody stand up. Look out there. It's goldenrod.
Average field.
Overgrown field, succession stage 1. You want me to fix that? Field, but it's still a field. It's not a woodland or anything yet. But after some number of years, and I would say after 5 to 10, you start to see a marked change. After a couple of years, what we start to see is, we still have those little dandelions, we still have grass, we still have goldenrod, but we start to see something else moving in, and that something else makes it a whole lot harder to walk. We start to see shrub growth. Sometimes it's called scrub and shrub. It's a mixture of herbaceous material and shrubby stuff. So who here has ever encountered and fought with and lived to tell the tale blackberries? Blackberry canes. Oh, they'll tear your skin open. Good field full of blackberries. The only way to go through that is on a tractor with a brush hog. Walking through it is an absolute misery. It's fantastic. Oh, it's way worth it. It's fantastic habitat for little rabbits and stuff. They like to hide down in the blackberry canes. Coyotes have a hard time getting at them that way. But, this is sort of a second stage. We start to see shrubs and scrubby growth. And if you drive up and down the road, that's what I should do. I should assign homework to take pictures of an area that you can identify as one of these stages. Yes, that's fantastic. I'll do that. I'm so glad I thought of that. So this second successional stage is quite frankly a pain in the everything to walk through. You thought I was going to, didn't you?
Yeah.
No, it's a pain in the everything. It's a pain in that too. It's a pain in everything because you're going to get torn to pieces by multiflora rose and blackberries and other kinds of shrubs and autumn olive, and it's just dense and awful. It's great habitat for small animals who want to hide from predators. Like rabbits. Multiflora rosebush is just evil. So a few years after this happens, so the scrub and shrub stage might last 10 or 20 years. Probably 10 or 15. Well, usually within the first, we'll say like 20 years or so, we end up with a young forest. And these are young trees. They're all about the same size. They all sort of grow straight up because the trees aren't competing hard for light. Now, most of this stuff has now been out-competed for light. It's died off. The trees have come in. A lot of those scrub and shrub kind of plants are now starting to really have to compete hard for light. They're not going to make it once the trees all grow in. And so it's starting to look more like a young forest. This is still pretty painful to navigate because those trees are close together. You still have remnant scrub and shrub growing underneath them. So it's not, they tend to be similar sized, straight trunked. There's a great example of this. If you drive Route 14 from Columbiana into Pennsylvania, just before the state line on the north side of the road. You know where the fireworks place on 14 is? Okay. On the other side of the road, just before you get to that fireworks place, just before you get to the state line, there's a beautiful example of what I would call stage 3 succession. And it's an old field that they've let grow. It's full of ash trees right now. And it's perfect. I mean, it's the absolute perfect picture. So if you want to go get a picture of something and happen to be heading that way, you know, that would work. Within 25 to 30 years, you're going to see an actual forest emerge. And we'll call it sort of early forest. No, it's not big yet. And this would probably be, you know, something like succession stage 4. But it's suddenly you're seeing a bigger mix of tree sizes. Some trees have died, some new trees have showed up. It doesn't look like it's all one age. Some of those trees have been excluded. They've faced competitive exclusion. They've died out. And so you're seeing open spaces that have led to the development of new smaller trees. You're seeing a bigger mix of species. And in time, this is what gives way to the big forest. So if you remember, we talked early on about the forests that early European settlers encountered and how they were actually pretty terrified because these forests that they were encountering were so dark that they seemed to go on for days and there was no end to them. And they were just enormous old-growth forests. Very complex ecosystems, lots of relationships, lots of crossovers. Well, in about 100 years, what we'll start to see are a big variety of trees. Not the California redwoods, we're not going to get those here. But we're going to get red maple, and we're going to get sugar maples, and we're going to get beech trees, and we're going to get walnuts, and we're going to get hickories, and we're going to get sycamores, depending on where we're at. We're going to get a big variety of species. We'll have dogwoods in the understory. We'll have understory and overstory trees. You know, we'll have little herbaceous things that grow in a mature forest down at the very bottom. And this is mature woods. Mature mixed hardwood forest. You know, and again, this is what we would get here. Would you grow a mature mixed hardwood forest in the deserts of Arizona? No. Would you grow it in the swamps of Florida? No. You're going to get a different mix of species based on the climate. This mature mixed hardwood forest starts to look a lot like what early settlers to this area would have seen. Now, in 100 years, are you going to regrow tens of thousands of years of ecosystem evolution? No. But it's starting that way. You know, we can still say it's a mature forest even if it doesn't look like old growth, even if it doesn't look like the original exactly. It's grown up. You know, being 21 is not the same as being 98. Both are grown-ups. One's had a whole lot more time to deepen and richen and think big thoughts, do have experiences. You know, mature forest isn't finished. It's still growing, but it's on its way. This is secondary succession. So we said, is this going to be the same everywhere, that final ecosystem? And you guys intuitively know it's not. For every place on the planet, there is what's called a climax community. That's the thing you're returning to. Okay, so every place on the planet, this is going to be a little bit different, but every place on the planet, there is going to be a climax community. There's going to be some biological community that after an area has gone through a disturbance and then the disturbance stops, there's a biological community that returns. That's the Climax Community. So around here, like we said, it's a mixed hardwood forest. Outside of Tucson, Arizona, it's a saguaro and mesquite desert. In central Florida, it's a saw palmetto jungle, basically. It's going to be a little bit different. In Oklahoma, what's it going to be? Prairie. It's going to be tall grass prairie. So it depends on temperature and precipitation, where you are on the globe, latitude. So it will be a little bit different.